Alice is a co-editor of the London Review of Books and the founding publisher of Silver Press, which is an independent feminist press based in London. Alice's book was written with Edna Bonhomme, is that how you say her name? Okay, called After Sex, and it's an anthology of fiction, prose, poetry, academic text, journalism, memoir, and it's a celebration, I suppose, of women's choices, women's bodies, people's reproductive choices, people's reproductive and sexual rights. And I just wanted to start by asking you that both you and Shan's book link the material to Roe against Wade in 1973 and also the overturning of Roe against Wade in 2022. And I wanted to ask you, is that part of the motivation for bringing this collection together?
Yeah, that was a huge part of the motivation. So I think, like Shan, like many people, we had felt the Dobbs ruling coming. It was inevitable that Roe was going to be challenged and would probably be overturned. And I think that I was personally a bit cynical about it. I felt that abortion rights had been restricted so much in so many states that for many women in Texas and other parts of the American South in particular, poor women, women of color, their options were already very few, and that criminalizing abortion really would not make that much difference. The more liberal states in the north and on the coast would probably have laws waiting to go straight into place to maintain that right. So I was a little bit cynical before and thought, well, what difference does this really make? The focus should be on making sure that people can access it, because at the minute plenty of people can't. And actually now I think that was a bit naive, because what I hadn't imagined was the atmosphere that is created after something like the Dobbs ruling, which overturned Roe v. Wade. That ruling last summer didn't just formalize the reality of many pregnant people in America who could not access abortion for reasons of cost or availability. What it did was create an atmosphere in which people who were pregnant could be arrested, could be imprisoned, people who had miscarriages were now subject to inquiries, people who ordered pills online, and they even, I forget which state it is, Sean might know, but they're trying to introduce a law which prevents you driving down certain roads in order to access an abortion in another state. So you can't even, it will be illegal to use that road as your way to gain an abortion in a state where it's legal. And this kind of dystopian reality that we might have seen in The Handmaid's Tale or something like that, I lacked the imagination to see that coming to pass, even though Human Rights Watch had already reported women in the States being questioned, in some cases charged, for instance, for having taken prescription or recreational drugs while pregnant, for tripping and falling downstairs, for getting into a fight at a bar, because it endangered the life of the fetus. And so there was already this sense in which women's bodies were being regarded by society and the law as vehicles for the production of children for society, and not as women's own bodies to do with as they saw fit. So yes, is the short answer. The overturning of Roe v. Wade was the main inspiration. But having said that, there were other things in play too. Like Shan has said, there was much to celebrate in the global south, in parts of Latin America and South Korea and other parts of the world. India have made huge advances for the rights of women and pregnant people. And just as Kirsty said, we're also seeing great opportunities for queer couples and couples who may otherwise have not been able to have children because there were restrictions. So in getting the pieces together for this book, we really wanted to draw on as much of the available English language, because we needed some restrictions, literature from the second half of the 20th century up to the present day, and just to show the huge range of experiences that women have gone through in seeking to work out how much choice they have given the context they're living in, the context in which they get pregnant, what they decide to do, and how they are left feeling afterwards. So it's not a polemical book that says everyone has to enjoy their abortion, find it liberating, and move on with their life. There are lots of different sentiments here. But it was to really bring together texts that foreground the experience of the pregnant person, put them in one place and let them speak to each other, because otherwise it can be quite hard to draw together all the genealogies of thinking and writing on this topic.
That's great, and I'll just ask you one more question, if that's okay, before we open it up. But I loved the pieces in the collection. I love the sister song piece near the end, which is drawing very directly on the Roe against Wade moment or moments. Nothing ever happens in a vacuum. I astonished myself realizing that I'd never read any Ursula Le Guin, so it's really nice to read that at the beginning of the book. But I'm wondering, like, how did you choose which excerpts made it into the book?
Well, my co-editor, Edna Bonhomme, and I, drew up a kind of wish list, I suppose, of all the things that we'd read. She has a PhD in abortion and reproductive health. I've read a lot through the course of my work as publisher at Silver Press. So we drew together all the things that we had found most personally interesting, helpful, surprising, provocative, whatever it was. And then we sought advice, and we basically just enriched the pool as much as possible. Some of the pieces in the collection have been abridged because we couldn't fit everything in at length. Some are a little bit more legalistic, others are quite funny, there are poems. So we also tried to get that range and to make sure that there was enough speaking across the generations and across the English-speaking world. But in the end, we just put in everything. That's why it's so fat. We put in everything that we thought was helpful, and there was a lot.
Thanks very much, Alice. I'd like to invite the audience now to ask questions, be part of the discussion. If you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, would you like to put up your hand?
Don't be shy.
Mary will come to you with the microphone.
Yep, there's one back there. We're almost up to you, I think. Last one, dog. There you go.
Sorry. I was just wondering, something that comes to mind for me a lot of the time when I think about reproductive rights is how you navigate something that's so private for a lot of people, and how you navigate the kind of the tension between the private and public and political aspects of it, and if that's something that anybody could speak about a little bit.
Yeah, one of the reasons we called this book After Sex was because so much of the abortion and reproductive justice literature that we were looking at made almost no mention of sex, especially feminist writings from the 60s and 70s. And it seems so strange to us that even then, when people were fighting very hard for rights to abortion and contraception to become widespread, there was still so much stigma about writing about sex and the reasons you might become pregnant, and that might be outside of marriage, that it might be foolish, drunken, that you might not be responsible in some way. And so the law which came into being with Roe v. Wade, it wasn't predicated on the woman's right to have an abortion. It was based on the idea that the privacy of the marital bedroom should not be invaded by the state. And feminist scholars have criticized the law on those grounds, but we can also see a way in which privacy is very damaging to women and to pregnant people. Privacy means you make your choices in silence, you experience the first 3 months in silence. There's shame and stigma around the fact that you're a sexual being and that you chose to procreate, or you accidentally created a life and you're now deciding what to do with it. All these things increase the burden, while at the same time removing none of the opportunity for the far right, as Sian has talked about, to make a kind of political subject of use. So it's bringing sex back into this, and the right to be in control of one's sex life is so central to this. And that kind of privacy question, I think, has a lot to do with stigma and shame that is still basically about sex primarily.
There's another question here.
I just wanted to ask about the pro-abortion or pro-choice movement in the UK and kind of what we perhaps should be doing next. Because I think we've accepted our abortion laws over the years. We don't have a right to an abortion. We have a right to visit a doctor and say that we need an abortion, and then we have to plead that there will be a negative impact on our mental or physical health, and then that has to be signed off not just by the doctor we've seen, but by a second doctor. And we've either experienced ourselves or have, sisters, mothers, nieces, children who've had horrendous experiences of going through that process. And so there's something about accepting that and accepting that we have to take abortion pills under medical supervision, despite the fact that it's entirely safe to get these things over the counter and take them at home. So I'm wondering if there are kind of just thoughts on what we should be really doing now, because as a feminist, it's not something that I've been that involved with, but now they're trying to take away the little that we've got. What should we be doing? What could we be doing?
Yeah, you're completely right. I mean, it's a scandal that for more than 40 years, the women of Northern Ireland were not able to access abortions despite paying their taxes for the NHS like everyone else in the UK. And as you say, the situation when it comes to abortion here is not actually that great. We don't have to go through what people in other countries go through, looking at the fetal heartbeat or waiting a week like they recently had to do in France to be sure you've made up your mind correctly. All these really patronizing decisions, as though the person contemplating the abortion wasn't a deeply moral and responsible person making the right choice for their family, their body, their future, as though it was something that silly girls do on a whim and they needed to be sort of brought round to the right opinion by some paternalistic doctor figure or two in this case, and even having to plead mental distress, which I actually find quite offensive to the people who need to abort because of severe mental distress, sometimes induced by extreme morning sickness or other things like this, or because of their circumstances. The law as it stands does not help the people who need the most help get the right sort of help, and it puts everyone else through unnecessary waiting and a kind of patronizing ritual where you have to plead special circumstances for something that is